it's Melissa here. Today we're going to be a little bit of a lunatic because we will be talking about the moon and the lunar cycle. See what I did there? Lunatic, lunartic. We will also be talking about the relationship between tidal forces and the moon. And for our activity today, we will be making a flip book of the lunar cycle. Are you ready? Okay, let's begin. I'm pretty sure we've all seen the moon before. Maybe we've seen it on TV, in the movies, or maybe you've even seen it in real life. But what exactly is a moon? Well, the moon is any astronomical body that orbits a planet of our solar system. Moons typically have a diameter of at least 1 kilometer, but moons that are smaller are called moonlets. The moonlight we see here on Earth is not actually produced by the moon. What we're seeing is sunlight, which is reflecting off the moon's surface. So as the moon orbits Earth, the sun lights up different parts of the moon, which makes it look like it's changing shape. However, the moon doesn't actually change shape. We just see more or less of it depending on how much sunlight is being reflected off the moon. This is what we know as phases of the moon. Phases of the moon are the shape changes we see here on Earth. It's how much of the moon appears to be lit by the sun. The moon is Earth's only natural satellite, and it takes about 27 days for it to make one lap around the Earth. But since the Earth is moving around the sun while the moon is moving around the Earth, it takes the moon about 30 days to go through its 8 different phases. This is known as a lunar month. I mentioned phases of the moon a couple of times already, so let's talk about them. There are 8 phases of the moon: the new moon, waxing crescent, first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, third quarter, and waning crescent. These 8 phases make up the lunar cycle. Now let's go through each individual phase. First up, we have the new moon. The new moon is the beginning of our lunar cycle. At this phase, the moon appears completely dark because the side that's facing Earth is the side of the moon that is not reflecting any sunlight. Next is waxing crescent. Waxing means growing, and crescent represents the shape made by the thin slice of light. Now we have the first quarter, which can also be called the half moon. From Earth, the moon appears to be half lit, but it's officially called the first quarter because the moon is a quarter of its way through the cycle. The fourth phase in this cycle is waxing gibbous. Gibbous means swollen, and we call it waxing because it grows thicker every night. Next is the full moon. The full moon is when the moon is at its biggest and brightest, and it's the easiest phase of the lunar cycle to see. From this next phase on, the moon begins to get smaller. Our next phase is called waning gibbous. Remember, gibbous means swollen, and waning means getting smaller or thinner. Now we have the third quarter phase. In this phase, the moon is 3/4 of its way through the cycle. Our 8th phase in the cycle is the waning crescent. The part of the moon that is lit by light is in a crescent shape, and the moon appears to be getting smaller. Since it is a cycle, the waning crescent becomes the new moon again, and the lunar cycle starts over. Did you know that the tides of the sea are caused by the gravitational pull of the moon? Tides are essentially waves that last for long periods of time in response to a force exerted by the moon. This force is known as gravity, and gravity is responsible for the attraction or the pulling together of all matter. The moon's gravitational pull generates a force known as the tidal force. A tidal force occurs when the mass of an object affects another object with its gravity. The tidal force generated by the moon causes Earth and its waters to bulge out towards the moon. As the Earth rotates, the moon pulls at different parts of the planet. The distance between the Earth and the moon is close enough that the moon's gravity is strong enough to move things around. The moon's gravity pulls on land, but it's not enough for anyone to notice. But when the gravity of the moon pulls on the water parts of the Earth, it's more noticeable because it creates this bulge in the direction of the moon, which generates a high tide. And as a result, the tide of the ocean is at its highest point. When the waters do not bulge to any side of the moon, the ocean tides are at its lowest point, which is known as a low tide. During the moon's quarter phases, the sun pulls against the moon's gravitational pull instead of with it. As a result, we get the highest low tides and the lowest high tides. Tides that occur during the moon's quarter phases are called neap tide. When the moon is at its full moon phase or its new moon phase, the high tides are at its highest point and the low tides are at its lowest point. This happens because the Earth, Moon, and the Sun are directly lined up together, and the added gravitational pull from the Sun helps create a bigger bulge. Alright, now it's time for today's activity. For our activity today, we are going to be making a flip book of the phases of the moon. For this activity, you're going to need 9 pieces of index card-sized paper, a black writing utensil, hole puncher, string, and if you want perfect circles, you'll need a perfect circle to trace. I'm going to be using 3" by 4" pieces of paper and this to draw my perfect circle. First, we're going to draw one circle on 8 of the 9 pieces of paper. The 9th piece of paper is going to be used for our title page. Next, we're going to start drawing out the 8 phases of the moon. What you're coloring in using your black coloring utensil represents the part of the moon that is not lit with sunlight. The remaining represents the part of the moon that is lit and what we see here on Earth. After drawing, you can write the name of the phase at the top or the bottom of your piece of paper. I'm going to be writing mine at the bottom. When you're done drawing out the 8 phases, you can make your title page using the last piece of paper. Be creative in your decorating. This is your flip book, so decorate it or design it any way you want. Don't forget to add a title. You can come up with your own title, just make sure it's related to the moon phases. I'm going to title mine The Lunar Cycle. When you're finished your title page, put your wonderful drawn out moon phases in order and make sure you put your title page at the front. We're going to use a hole puncher to punch a hole at the top left corner and the bottom left corner of our booklet. We're then going to use string to bind our booklet together. Now we have our flip book. And this concludes today's lesson and activity. I hope you had fun and that you learned a thing or two about the moon. Stay curious, reach for the stars, and I hope your day is out of this world.